Welcome to War and Untold Stories. Here, we explore the hidden side of history. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Hidden in the mountains north of Damascus lies Syednaya Prison. To many Syrians, its very name inspires fear. To the world, it represents torture, secrecy, and silence. In this documentary, we uncover the dark history of this prison and hear the voices of those who survived its walls. Established in 1986 as a military prison, Sednaya quickly evolved into one of Syria's most secretive detention facilities. It became a place where political prisoners, activists, and ordinary civilians disappeared without trial. Behind its imposing facade, Syednaya concealed a sinister reality. The prison's purpose was not to contain criminals or punish those found guilty of crimes, but rather to silence dissent and maintain control through fear. In 2011, as the Syrian uprising against Bashar al-Assad's regime intensified, Syednaya became a pivotal instrument of oppression. As protesters took to the streets demanding democracy and an end to the Assad family's four-decade rule, the regime responded with brutal force. Those who dared to question the government or support the opposition found themselves targeted and imprisoned in Saydnaya. It didn't matter if you were a student activist, a journalist, or a bystander caught up in the chaos. If the regime suspected you of disloyalty or involvement in the uprising, your name could appear on a list, and the next thing you know, you'd be dragged from your home in the middle of the night and thrown into Saydnaya. The Syrian army conducted sweeping arrests across the country, rounding up thousands of suspected dissidents and transferring them to Syednaya for interrogation and indefinite detention without charge or trial. Once inside the prison's notorious gates, your fate was uncertain. You might be tortured until you confessed to crimes you didn't commit. You might be held indefinitely without seeing a judge, or you might be executed swiftly and quietly. Torture in Syednaya was relentless. Prisoners were beaten with electric tools, metal rods, and plastic pipes, leaving their bodies broken and scarred. Many prisoners suffered permanent disabilities as a result of the torture they endured. The regime employed starvation as a weapon, denying prisoners food and water for extended periods to break their spirits and force them to comply. Medical care was deliberately withheld, leading to severe health complications and even deaths. Detainees were kept in overcrowded cells, often without basic sanitation, forcing them to sleep on the floor in unsanitary conditions. Some prisoners developed life-threatening infections and diseases due to the lack of hygiene and medical attention. Prisoners were deprived of essential medications, including those for chronic conditions, resulting in worsened health and, in some cases, death. To extract confessions or force prisoners to renounce their beliefs or allegiances, the regime used psychological torture. This included threats, intimidation, sleep deprivation, and forced isolation. Prisoners were subjected to mock executions, witnessing others being killed and believing it was their turn next. Forced to watch videos or slideshows depicting violence, torture, and death as a form of mental and emotional abuse. Prisoners were forced to listen to loud, disturbing noises, including sirens and screams, to disorient and traumatize them. Sexual abuse was also used as a form of torture and humiliation. Prisoners were subjected to sexual assault and rape, both by prison personnel and other inmates. This abuse was intended to degrade and inflict maximum psychological trauma on the prisoners. Women prisoners were subjected to particular forms of cruelty, such as coerced pregnancies and forced abortions. In Saydnaya, children were not exempt from cruelty. Prisoners as young as 12 endured the same harsh punishments as adults, including physical beatings and forced sleeplessness. These tactics aimed to break down all barriers, destroy any sense of dignity, and force prisoners to comply with the regime's demands. Many prisoners suffered permanent physical and psychological trauma due to the abuse they endured. They continue to experience flashbacks, nightmares, and post-traumatic stress, which can be debilitating and long-lasting. While the Syrian government has denied these accusations, numerous reports by human rights organizations and testimonies from former prisoners provide a harrowing account of the atrocities committed within Saydnaya's walls. Amnesty International's 2017 report titled The Human Slaughterhouse documented the systematic executions and torture of prisoners in Syria between 2011 and 2015. According to the report, thousands of prisoners were executed in Saydnaya during this period. The executions were carried out at night following summary trials that lasted only minutes. The trials were conducted by military field courts that did not allow defendants to present evidence, call witnesses, or have legal representation. The prisoners were convicted based solely on confessions extracted under duress and sentenced to death. Many of those executed were not involved in the conflict, having been arrested for activities such as posting anti-government comments on social media or simply living in areas where protests had occurred. The report highlighted that the scale and brutality of the killings in Syednaya were without precedent in Syria since the current uprising began. The report provided graphic details of the torture methods used in Syednaya, including beatings with metal rods and electric cables, suspension by ropes from the wrists or ankles, exposure to extreme temperatures, and sexual abuse. The report also documented the use of starvation as a form of torture, with prisoners sometimes denied food for up to 3 weeks. Medical staff at Saydnaya were complicit in the abuse, providing misleading diagnoses, withholding treatment, and prescribing excessive sedatives. The report concluded that the Syrian authorities deliberately and knowingly allowed thousands of prisoners to die from torture and ill treatment. In response to the report, the Syrian government denied the allegations, dismissing them as part of a campaign by what it called terrorist organizations and their allies in the media. However, the report was supported by evidence from former inmates and corroborated by other human rights organizations. The Caesar report released in 2014 provided further evidence of the atrocities committed in Saydnaya. Compiled by an unknown former Syrian military photographer known only as Caesar, the report included photographs of thousands of dead Syrian men, women, and children who had been detained by the Syrian authorities. The report provided more insight into the inner workings of Saydnaya and the extent of the Syrian regime's brutality. In 2013, two Syrian-American journalists, Diana Simon and Samir al-Hamzi, published an article in The Atlantic entitled Inside Syria's Most Brutal Prison. Based on interviews with former inmates, the article detailed the horrific conditions and torture practices at Saydnaya. Former prisoners described the constant atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, as well as the use of starvation, beatings, and sexual abuse as interrogation techniques. The article shed light on the regime's tactics to break prisoners mentally and physically, highlighting the psychological toll of imprisonment in Saydnaya. Despite the ongoing conflict in Syria, parts of the Syrian opposition have continued to investigate and document the situation in Saydnaya. They have uncovered evidence of mass graves containing the remains of thousands of prisoners, suggesting the scale of the killings. Additionally, there have been reports of continued detentions and human rights abuses in Saydnaya, indicating that the atrocities may not have ceased despite the reduced media attention. These accounts, though difficult to verify independently due to the security risks and restrictions on access to the prison, paint a grim picture of the situation in Syria and raise serious concerns about the treatment of prisoners. The Syrian regime's willingness to use brutal tactics to silence dissent and maintain control has been evident in the crackdown on protesters and opposition figures. Saydnaya serves as a symbol of this oppression and the lengths to which the regime will go to protect its power. Saydnaya was more than a prison, it was a tool of terror designed to strike fear into the hearts of Syrians across the nation. Whether you were a suspected opposition member or an innocent bystander, the mere possibility of being sent to Saydnaya was enough to make you wary of your surroundings and fearful of your own shadow. The prison's influence extended beyond its barbed wire fences and watchtowers. It permeated every aspect of life in Syria. People lived in constant fear of arbitrary arrest, knowing that voicing dissent or supporting the opposition could have dire consequences. Families were torn apart as loved ones were taken away in the dead of night and never seen again. Communities were shattered as neighbors turned on each other, reporting any suspicious activity or overheard conversation to the authorities. The regime's grip on Syria was tightened through the threat of Saydnaya, turning every citizen into a potential target. The stories of survival are testaments to the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. They remind us that even in the darkest of places, hope can endure. The survivors of Saydnaya have become voices for justice, speaking out to ensure that the world remembers and learns from the horrors of this prison. Their bravery in sharing their experiences is crucial in holding the perpetrators accountable and preventing such atrocities from happening again. Sednaya Prison remains one of the darkest chapters in Syria's modern history. Through survivor testimonies and international reports, the world continues to learn about its horrors, reminding us of the urgent need for justice and accountability.